Find the 2014 program guide at abc.net.au/rn.
And Natasha Mitchell with a warm welcome to you and to the Life Matters Friday Talkback on Radio National right across Australia. Here's a heading that will get you talking this morning: Women Against Feminism. Yes, that's a catch cry or a campaign doing the global rounds on social media at the moment, on Tumblr, on Facebook, on Twitter. Women, mostly young women, are posting photos of themselves holding placards up which list reasons why they feel they don't need feminism. Some are describing feminism as divisive, as negative, as anti-male, as patronising, as promoting women as victims. As you can imagine, it's unleashed an almighty war of words in response, both for and against, from both women and men. Here's one response: feminism doesn't make women victims, sexism does. So we'd love your thoughts on all this. What does it bring up for you, this heading, Women Against Feminism? Love your calls this morning, all perspectives, 1300 22 55 76. Do many young women see feminism as no longer relevant to their lives and relationships? From getting the vote to reproductive rights, from being able to keep a job after you marry, to jobs in politics. Many would argue these are the fruits of feminism, but is it a social movement whose time has come and gone? Lots of ways to express your views this morning. Give us a call, 1300 22 55 76. That's 1300 call RN. You can text us. The number is 0418 226 576. We're on Twitter at RN Life Matters, and many of you are already rocking and rolling on our Facebook page. If you're in WA, trouble getting through, try our listener line 02 8333 1430. Now, my first guest this morning is Janet Bloomfield. She's a blogger and one of the most prolific commentators in the Women Against Feminism discussion online. She joins us this morning from Canada with a rotten sore throat, I think. Welcome, Janet.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I do apologize for my throat. And I had the very great pleasure of living in Melbourne for a year, so I'm absolutely thrilled to be talking to Australia.
How did you get involved with this online debate?
Well, I think the Hobby Lobby decision in America, which is the idea that the health insurance doesn't have to pay for women's birth control, it really just exploded the whole issue of women against feminism. So as I write an anti-feminist blog, and I write anti-feminist articles for Thought Catalog and for A Voice for Men, and I started seeing all these tweets coming my way, and I would retweet them and respond, and it just went absolutely crazy. I've been an active anti-feminist writer for quite some time now, and I just think it's absolutely wonderful to see all these young women saying, please, egalitarianism, enough with just women's rights. We need everyone to have rights.
Why do you write an anti-feminist blog? What's at the heart of that for you?
For me, it's because I think that feminism really has become extremely negative and extremely anti-male. You see that very, very clearly in the school system with so many little boys who have to take drugs to participate. And it's not little boys who've changed. It's the school system.
You're referring to ADHD medication and the like.
Right, Ritalin and Adderall and that sort of thing. It's to make boys sit calmly and to concentrate instead of being very kinetic, vital. I'm not sure if that's such a problem in Australia because you guys are so sports mad. So all the kids have lots of opportunity to get out and run around. In North America, such a big problem. And it's not little boys that have changed. It's a school system under feminist pedagogy that is now actively hurting little boys.
But you're an interesting sort of bundle of contradictions because you also acknowledge that you are you're anti-feminism. You're anti-feminism, but you're anti-sexism. And many women who have responded to the Women Against Feminism campaign online have suggested perhaps that feminism is being misunderstood or misrepresented. What's your feeling about that?
I actually love it when they get out there and say, just get a dictionary, or you're ignorant, or you're uneducated, because it perfectly encapsulates what we're talking about. That when confronted with a group of clever, young, bright, smart women who have an idea that doesn't march lockstep with feminism, what feminists do is try to create a victim complex around them. Oh, you're a victim and you just don't understand. You're a victim of ignorance. You're a victim of lack of education. Rather than saying, listen, these are smart, capable adults, and we can engage them in dialogue. Let's talk to them about why they're wrong. Instead, you get feminists saying, you're dumb, you're ignorant, you're actually just a victim. And it's exactly what we're opposed to. We need to start seeing women as fully formed, adult, rational people who can have their own ideas and who don't need an ideology to tell them what to think.
Do you believe in equality for women? Pay equality?
Absolutely.
Equal access
Absolutely.
to political power?
Absolutely. I have no question. To me, that's just a no-brainer. I am absolutely pro-abortion. I'm an extremely liberal-leaning person politically. What I don't like is suggesting to women that the fact that they don't have political ambition is a problem. It's not a problem. For women who want to get in there and want to run the gauntlet with politics, go right ahead. Women actually can do anything. They don't want to, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. Most men don't want political power either.
When you look in the corridors of power, though, there aren't so many women there, and perhaps that's part of the quest.
Right. I'm not sure what the situation in Australia is, but in North America, when women actually get involved in politics and run, they are more likely to be elected than their male counterparts. The issue, I'm not going to describe it as a problem because it's not a problem. The issue is that women aren't interested. They don't want to make the commitment that it takes to achieve political power until, their family life is over. Someone like Nancy Pelosi, who raised her 5 children and then got involved in political power. We have different life stages than men have, and it's okay. I don't think women should be ashamed of not having any ambition other than taking care of their kids and launching them out of the nest. And then let's look and see what we can do in the world. It's okay to do that.
Is this what young women who are posting under this banner, Women Against Feminism, are saying?
Absolutely, it's what they're saying. I'm not a victim. It's okay for me to stay at home with my children. It's okay if I don't want to have a job right now.
Let's take some calls. It's the Friday Life Matters Talkback, and we're using the opportunity of a campaign that's doing the rounds globally online and beyond, as our guest Janet Bloomfield has described. Women Against Feminism. What thoughts does that campaign raise for you? 1300 22 55 76. Full board. Let's take some calls before I bring in my next guest. Tess in New South Wales, you're 21. What would you like to add?
I'd like to add that the real reason that we need feminism is because it's demonized so much. It's all about equality. It's all about making sure that women have the same opportunities as men. It's all these things that have been fought for over the years. It's still not equal. There's still even a 17% pay gap in Australia, and we're doing better than North America, where women are being kept alive because they're pregnant against their wish and against their family's wishes. It's just not a great space for women to live in. You think of all the issues that they've had in North America with the Elliot Rodgers case, and the whole outcry of yes, all women, because all women have experienced street harassment, they've experienced sexual harassment. It's just a reality for every woman in Australia and the world. It's not about being a victim, it's about standing up and fighting for your right to feel safe and be in a safe space.
Given that you're probably the age that a lot of the young women who are posting to the Women Against Feminism campaign are, do you have conversations, though, with many of your peers who really don't feel that feminism is relevant to them and their lives right now?
Yes, but that's mostly because I live in a fairly privileged section of society. Privilege is being able to ignore this sort of thing and to say, oh, I don't need it because I don't have these issues. I can cope with being harassed on the street. But, one woman every week gets killed by her partner in Australia in domestic violence issues. That's a real problem. There's a great article by Charlie Pickering, who wrote a great one about, we should talk about domestic violence because it's still such a huge issue in Australia.
Tess, thank you very much for the call and kicking off the conversation. Thank you. Could you stay on the line, please? Tashinga in New South Wales, good morning to you.
Good morning, Natasha.
What would you like to add here?
Well, I would just like to add the point that feminism, which is misrepresented as this idea that, as a stay-at-home mom, you shouldn't be as a stay-at-home mom. But the fact is, women in relationships and women who are pregnant mothers are actually facing discrimination. For example, this weekend, Liz Broderick outlined that, pregnant...
And just to explain, Elizabeth Broderick is our sex discrimination... no, she's not. She is the, Sex Discrimination Commissioner in Australia.
Yeah. She revealed the fact that, women, that working mothers are so far discriminated within the workplace that 1 in 2 of them experience discrimination, that 32% of them, as a result, are forced to resign or leave the workplace forever. Childcare is still expensive. We've got domestic violence remaining an institutional problem. So we shouldn't misrepresent that feminism is only for affecting women who just want to not have children and then go into the workforce. Yeah, the idea of feminism is about empowering women in all across all fields. So this heavy misrepresentation of feminism is what is causing this idea of women against feminism.
Tashinga, thank you very much for your point of view. Appreciate it. And let's come to Julian in Melbourne. Good morning to you. I think you'd like to give examples of good feminism and bad feminism. What do you mean?
Well, I think early feminism had the problem of female writers trying to project their experience on the whole of womankind, which wasn't necessarily the case. Their bad experience. I think there are good feminists. I think Eva Cox is an example of a sensible, good feminist I want to listen to on the radio. I think feminism has its chauvinisms, which are every bit as bad as the male chauvinists they were including. Consciousness raising never seemed to include the people they were trying to raise their consciousness about. That's all I have to say.
Julian, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Let's come back to Janet Bloomfield briefly. Janet, a tweet that we've received from a woman called Catherine, she asks, please ask your guest, if feminism is hurting little boys, what is hurting girls and women in today's world? I thought I'd put that question to you.
I'm not really understanding it.
I guess it was in response to your concern that feminism has given young boys a hard deal, boys and men in particular. And I guess she's concerned that girls and women are having a tough time too, and what might be at the roots of that.
Oh, I would probably say it's economic, that poverty is a huge issue that can affect boys and girls equally. I mean, that's what Women Against Feminism is. It's saying if you're only going to focus on little girls, you're going to miss this huge, huge category of humanity called little boys who are also suffering. That when feminism says we need to focus on the needs of women and girls, they're leaving out, by definition, half of humanity, and it's actually boys who are suffering badly right now in school system. I don't know what your college ratios are, but in North America, it's getting to be absolutely terrible, unless, of course, you only count STEM degrees, in which case it's still mostly men graduating from the really tough, hard degrees. And it was interesting that one of the commenters brought up, we need rights equal to men. Well, it's actually women who have more rights than men. I believe in Australia, a woman is allowed to choose whether or not she wishes to be a mother. A man cannot do that. He does not. Sex is consent to parenthood for men. If it results in a pregnancy, he will be forced to assume responsibility, and women will not be. So women have reproductive rights, and men do not.
But you've said,
and we need to address that.
You've just said that men have fewer rights than women.
Yes.
Do you mean that across the board?
Well, I mean, no, we have to talk about specific rights. I'm betting that it's legal to cut babies' genitals in Australia as long as the baby is a male. Is that true?
You're talking about circumcision.
I'm talking about taking a scalpel and cutting a piece of healthy tissue off a tiny infant for for someone who cannot possibly consent. They're a newborn. You do that to a girl, you go to jail. Boys are not protected. Why not?
Okay.
Why aren't they important?
You're raising interesting issues, and I'm sure we'll get lots of calls in response. The number to call is 1300 22 55 76. We're talking about a campaign online which goes under the banner Women Against Feminism. Interested in your views as to whether you think feminism has relevance today, particularly for young women. But if you're a young guy, I'd love to hear from you too. 1300 call RN. Let's weave in the next guest. Monica Dux is a social commentator and columnist for The Age. She's co-author of The Great Feminist Denial, which looked at the perception of feminism among young women. Good morning, Monica.
Good morning, Natasha.
Thanks for joining us in the Melbourne studios. How do you view the Women Against Feminism comments that are circulating on social media at the moment?
Look, it's nothing new. We've been hearing this kind of anti-feminism again and again for many years, ever since feminism really began. I think it's a big distraction in a lot of ways. A lot of the messages that these young women are putting up are essentially a profound misunderstanding of what feminism actually is. I mean, let's be clear. Feminism is a very broad, diverse movement. It encompasses many different ideas. It has some core principles, and core principles which the majority of women will actually agree with if you offer them the definition. But this kind of fear-mongering that takes place, and this sense that, oh, there's this big bad feminist who's doing all these terrible things, such as giving our young boys ADHD, which is sort of news to me. A lot of that kind of myth-making is, you know, it's really par for the course with feminism and with what we have to put up with. And so I'm not that surprised by it.
But many of the women posting under this Women Against Feminism banner are angry that they are being accused of not understanding feminism, that feminists are being arrogant and dismissive of their views. Is that a valid concern?
No, because they aren't understanding feminism. And I'll give you an example. There's been a lot of talk from these women about stay-at-home mums. Feminists don't respect stay-at-home mums. Now, there's a tremendous amount of feminist work that has consistently tried to champion the rights of women who choose to stay at home, who choose to take on care roles. In fact, one of the big feminist platforms is trying to discuss the importance and trying to change society so that we value care workers more, whether it's for small children or elderly, parents. And so a lot of the issues that they raise actually are feminist issues. When they talk about victimhood, I mean, if you go back to the 90s, a lot of feminism was actually about self-empowerment and this whole idea of not being victims, that women don't see themselves as victims. And so I think it is very confused, and I do think it is a misunderstanding, and it's pretty typical. I mean, and I think it ends up being a very big distraction because we all love hearing that young women don't want to be feminists, and here, look, they're all fighting each other. Feminist work will continue. Feminists feminist issues are everywhere, and I think your first caller outlined many of those issues. It's not going to go away because a whole lot of women feel very frightened, I think, by what feminism actually can do.
Some of the women who are mothers who are posting under the hashtag Women Against Feminism say they feel judged by other women and by feminism, and Janet's made this point too, for their choice to stay at home to parent their children full time. I mean, this is a powerful feeling that for some women, and for feminist women included, they've been sort of shocked to encounter that reaction to that choice.
I also think a lot of women who go into the workforce feel very judged for those choices, that they're not caring for their children enough, or their choices to put their children into childcare is seen as somehow damaging their kids. I don't think that's a feminist issue. I think the feminist issue here is we need to provide equality of opportunity for women. We need to, restructure workplaces so that there's more flexibility, so that women feel they can make choices without being judged. Now, that's something that feminism is actually championed. It's not something that feminism is actually trying to work against. And I think that's where some of the misunderstanding starts taking place.
What about the view, though, that feminism is construed as being anti-male? This is a very strong sentiment. Let me just read a couple of comments that have been posted under the banner Women Against Feminism. My son doesn't need to feel... I don't need feminism because my son doesn't need to feel like less of a person simply because of his gender. agenda. Another one. I don't need feminism because when I'm working in a lab, I don't want my co-workers to know that I'm a woman. I want them to know that I'm a scientist. Another one. I don't need feminism because I want my boys to grow up knowing what true equality is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, once again, this is another myth of feminism, that it's all man-hating. Now, of course, feminism is there to benefit men as well as women. And I think what we've witnessed in recent years in Australia in particular is a lot more male voices coming forward. And in Victoria, a very good example, I think, is our Police Commissioner, Ken Lay, who has spoken out very vocally in recent times about domestic violence. And, feminism does benefit men as well as women. But you can't kind of ignore the fact that we live in a very unequal society where women are paid less, where women retire with far less superannuation and savings, so they're going to more likely end up in poverty in later years in life, where women are the victims of domestic violence, where women don't have the kind of reproductive rights that we think that they should have. And, and on and on. Well, we have one female cabinet member in Parliament. Now, Janet said, in North America, women are more likely to be voted in when they're women. But in Australia, it's actually, it's embarrassing, the fact that we only have Julie Bishop in cabinet. So you don't have to look very far to see the level of inequality throughout society for women.
Okay, I'm going to weave in a third guest in a moment. I want to take a board of calls. It's Friday. It's our Life Matters Talkmate, Natasha Mitchell, with you. We also have with us Janet Bloomfield. She is a blogger based in Canada, one of the most prolific commentators in the Women Against Feminism discussion that's happening online at the moment. And we also have with us Monica Dux, social commentator and author, co-author of The Great Feminist Denial. We'll get to that. But Sheila in Queensland, what would you like to add about young women and feminism?
Hello, Natasha. Young women and feminism, or just feminism. Can you hear that truck, Natasha?
No, we can hear you. Let us know what you're thinking.
Women and sons. Okay, let me call my thoughts together. Women and sons. If the women, this woman is talking a lot about her poor little boys, okay? Every day I deal with men that have been raised by women. That's why we need feminism, and I suggest to it's not about staying at home, it's not about protecting anything, it's a value, like right now, that's why my concentration.
I'm just going to ask you.
Around men, machinery, and their value system about life, work, all day long.
So what is feminism to you?
And if I wasn't a feminist, I would be probably dead, or mad, and the men certainly would want me dead, and they definitely think I'm mad.
Sheila, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Lana in Canberra, good morning to you. You're 22.
Yes. I'm 22 and a mum, and I'm also studying postgraduate part-time. And I thought it would just be interesting to add to the conversation, that I agree with the dictionary definition of feminism. I'm all for women's equality of opportunities and kind of ending discrimination for girls and women, particularly in terms of education. But I really hesitate to identify with the label of feminism, because there is so much emotional and political and linguistic baggage attached to it. And I think the Women Against Feminism movement is probably, I think there's a really opportunity that we might be missing to look at, what is the baggage that women are reacting against, that they're willing to throw out feminism.
What is the baggage for you? Why do you feel uncomfortable with that word?
I guess for me the hesitation would be associating with that idea of maybe political left-wing leaning tendencies, or an idea of abandoning, sorry, that's my 2-year-old daughter kicking the toys in front of me, or abandoning traditional family values that I hold very dearly, a whole raft of things like that, which, as you pointed out, is quite a contradiction, because I agree with the definition and I support the idea of equality of opportunity for women, particularly in education and workforce.
Yeah, interesting. It's complex for you, isn't it? So the label itself is a concern.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, probably that's something that's coming across with the Women Against Feminism movement as well, that it's not necessarily, we can say, oh, well, these women just don't understand what feminism is. That's one approach. But I think a far richer approach, and an approach that will open up far more dialogue, would be to say, what is it about feminism? What has feminism become in their eyes and their minds that they're willing to throw out, that idea of equality of opportunity for women and girls because they don't agree with the associations of the term for whatever reason.
Lana, thanks very much for the call. Daniel in New South Wales, good morning to you. I think you've had an argument with your wife.
Yes, I have. Let me just say that I agree very much with the second caller. Your second guest, I've forgotten her name.
Monica,
yeah. But I'm a stay-at-home dad. My wife is she works at UNSW in the engineering department, and her job is to encourage young high school women into engineering and also to maintain women in engineering before they drop out because, there's a high attrition rate because they get in there and they think it's a boys' club. And at the moment, it very much is an old boys' club. But my argument with her was feminism, it seems to be about encouraging women into traditionally male pursuits, which is great, and I'm all about equality. I mean, while razor blades are considered a luxury item and tampons are not, we have inequality. But it seems to be pushing girls into more physical activity, into sort of more corporate roles and things like that. But rather than elevating, like Monica was saying, elevating traditional female roles. And I'm not saying that women need to stay at home and men need to go to work. I mean, on the contrary, I'm a stay-at-home dad. However, there just seems to be a sort of...
So one comes at the cost of another, do you believe?
Well, it just seems to be almost anti-women to be sort of pushing girls into more masculine pursuits. I mean, in a way, it's kind of anti-feminism because it's saying, well, what women have traditionally done is inferior to what boys do.
Okay, thanks.
And to be a feminist, you have to do what boys do, which I think is bollocks. I think, who'd have thought if we'd have Isaac Newton or William Shakespeare without a fantastic mother or fantastic sisters?
Very interesting point you make, and thank you, Daniel, for the call. I'm going to get a quick pick-up from Janet Bloomfield and Monica Dux on that. Monica.
I think that's a very interesting point because if you flip that on its head, another thing that feminists have been very concerned with in recent years is that a lot of traditionally female jobs, such as childcare, are paid abominably compared to comparative male jobs. And so, I mean, it's not just about getting women into jobs that they have been excluded from and giving them that equality of opportunity, but it's also valuing the work that women have traditionally done, which is heavily undervalued. I mean, childcare workers in Australia are paid abysmally, and it really shows how we value their own work. So, there's two sides to the coin with that. But once again, I need to say, I think it's really important to point out that there are so many different feminist ideas, so many different ways of being a feminist, and so many different ways of engaging as a feminist. There's not just this one idea, and we seem to be setting up here this idea that there's this big bad feminist or there's this one feminist idea, and that's just not the case. That's one of the big myths of anti-feminism today.
Janet Bloomfield, are you setting up feminism in that way?
I don't think so at all. I mean, the one girl who was ambivalent about calling herself a feminist said she could get behind the idea for equality for women and girls, and she wanted to see a promotion of opportunity for women and girls. And what we're saying in anti-feminism is, no, we want to see equality of opportunity for everyone. We want egalitarianism. Girls who want to be engineers, fantastic. But there shouldn't be a political ideology in place to shame them into thinking that an occupation traditionally occupied by men is more valuable than what they might want to do simply in their own heart. And it works the opposite way, too. Nobody should be shaming a man who prefers to stay at home and raise his children. And but you shouldn't be taking engineers and...
Who are these people shaming you, Janet? I think often when we talk about anti-feminism, often women and men will say, oh, there's this terrible feminist who's doing these things. Can you actually name a feminist who has shamed you, for choosing to stay at home with your children?
the actual program, Encourage Girls into Engineering, is shaming girls who don't want to be engineers. The fact that you need to shove them in that direction means it's not their natural inclination.
So all girls are being shoved into being engineers. That's the first I've heard of that. I mean, honestly, I think
it just has to be a few. As soon as you start saying engineering is more valuable than being a housewife, which is implicit in those kind of programs, it's like going into the engineering class and trying to force some of the men to be stay-at-home dads.
Well, we will get a big response to that, and I'm staying right out of that conversation because I just happen to do an engineering degree. So it's Friday, it's Life Matters. Joining me is Janet Bloomfield from Canada. She's a blogger. Her blog goes with the website address judgybitch.com. No less than provocative, Janet. And we have Monica Dux with us too, author and social commentator, author of The Great Feminist Denial. We're talking about a campaign that's doing the rounds online under the heading Women Against Feminism. You'll find it on Twitter and Facebook and Tumblr, all those sites. And we'd love your calls, 1300 22 55 76 or 1300 call RN. If you're having trouble getting through, you can head to our listener line 02 8333 1430. We have a full board and we'll come straight back to you. Like to weave into the conversation now, Alex Gorman. She's a contributor to the online magazine Mamma Mia. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, Natasha. Thanks for having me on.
Now, you make an interesting case and suggest that feminism has a marketing problem. On what basis?
I think that the feminism isn't really being that well articulated to young women especially. I mean, while you did have a 22-year-old call Alana earlier, there probably aren't that many girls in their teens and early 20s who are listening to the kinds of conversations that we're having now. And so when they first encounter feminism, it's in a very confusing and sometimes quite chaotic environment, which is online, where there's a lot of different kinds of information. There are so many different viewpoints that it can just sort of really muddy the waters. And my argument is that the first time women encounter feminism, it should be from someone that they know, from someone that they love, potentially through the education system, and they should be introduced to the problems of female inequality early and have those questions answered early so they don't kind of go online and get this very sort of warped idea about what feminism is or what feminism could be.
For example, warped in what way?
Well, for example, I think that Janet actually earlier on made a feminist argument when she said that men shouldn't be discriminated against for choosing to be stay-at-home dads. I think that that's a feminist argument, and that women shouldn't have their housework undervalued. That, to me, is a feminist point of view as well. But, of course, if the first time you encounter feminism is on the comment section of a blog like Jezebel, you're going to get shouted at for saying that, potentially by someone who really doesn't necessarily know anything more than you do, but you will find it to be quite combative and quite unpleasant, and it's not really a space for kind of nutting ideas out.
Is part of this, one commentator has asked in the past this question, is the reason for feminism's unpopularity, particularly amongst young women, the straight-laced stigma of the word itself? I mean, I wonder whether we need to move beyond that conversation, that it's down to semantics.
I think we absolutely do need to move beyond the conversation that it's down to semantics, because, as Monica said, I think that this idea that it's down to semantics is a huge distraction. And you don't see any other kind of political movement where everyone feels like they have to 100% agree with what every other person is saying. I mean, I'm sure not all of the members of the Labour Party or the Liberal Party agree with each other. Not every person who calls themselves a socialist has the same views as other socialists. And feminism is exactly the same thing. Every individual who identifies with this broad church has a right to their own opinion within it. And there's never going to be complete cohesion, nor should there be. And I think that we haven't articulated that message properly, that idea that it's okay to be fighting for the same goals, which is equality for men and women, but disagree on the finer points.
But what Janet's talking to, and what Lana was talking to, was a sense of feeling judged when they make choices. And feminist women have identified with this as well. When they have children and they want to spend time at home parenting full time, they feel a great discomfort about that amongst their peers at times.
I think the nature of sitting around and judging women is actually a feminist issue in and of itself, because the fact that female choices face so much more scrutiny than male choices is a huge problem in our society. And women who don't identify as feminists feel judged, and feminists feel judged. We all feel incredibly judged as women because our choices suffer far more scrutiny than male choices, and that's part of what contributes to male and female inequality.
Alex, when extremely successful, perhaps empowered women like Katy Perry, like the actor Shailene Woodley, like the performer Lady Gaga, say on the public stage, I am not feminist, I don't identify with feminism, what impact can that have on young women?
A lot of young women get most of their sort of news about the world from the internet and from the sort of celebrity and pop culture figures that they follow. So the example that I used in my article was Shailene Woodley, who was asked if she was a feminist, and everything she's ever said in interviews about what she thinks about the relationship between women and men and what she thinks about gender would imply that she is a feminist. But when asked, I don't think she had that solid a grounding in what feminism is. So she said, no, I'm not a feminist. And then, of course, the feminist media immediately started calling her an idiot for saying that and shouting at her about it. So if your first ever introduction into feminism is someone on Jezebel calling you an idiot for saying that you're not a feminist, of course you're not going to be a feminist after that, because you now associate feminism with mean girls. Now, if Shailene Woodley had been sat down at 15 by an older sister's friend and kind of talked through feminism in a real consciousness-raising way, had been told you don't always have to agree, yes, it's controversial, but all worthwhile beliefs have some controversy around them, then she probably would have said, yeah, I am a feminist.
Let's come back briefly to Janet Bloomfield, but before I take some calls. Janet, Robert has texted us, Monica is right, there's no sense in opposing something as broad and diverse as feminism. Janet is a feminist who is seeking attention just like any other reactionary. That's Robert in Chippendale in Sydney. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, let me just first start by saying, Alex, I think that everything you had to say there was really, really smart. And my take on it is that the combative, aggressive, mean girls have taken over. And I don't think you're going to get the kind of feminism that you want back. It's time to move forward to egalitarianism. And the second thing is people like Robert who think that I'm just trying to get attention. It's very, very typical. You're dumb, you're seeking male approval, you're seeking attention rather than actually discuss the issues. And what's really ironic about it is it's exactly what almost every woman holding a sign objects to. That you stand up to feminists and say, I am not a victim of anything other than perhaps my own personal choices. And then a whole dialogue starts about how you're a victim of ignorance. You're a victim of needing male approval. You're a victim of being confused. You're a victim of not having guidance. It's the exact narrative that we're saying, no, it's time to treat women as adults with agency who can hold opinions and who don't need some little fairy tale spun to explain why they're dumb or wrong.
But what will be of interest to some women would be that, for example, you in your biography on your website say your children, have never seen the inside of a daycare centre. So there's a sort of judgment implicit in that, in the choices that some other women have made.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why the blog is called Judgy Bitch. I don't want people to come think they're going to get any sort of nuanced or apologetic argument. They're not. And it's really not my way of saying that I don't think women should be out working. What I don't like is women who are out working with their hearts utterly shattered because feminism has not been honest with them about what that's going to feel like. And they've set up a life in which they have no choices. 70% of working women at Forbes are working because they have to. In a Forbes magazine survey, let me clarify, 70% would rather be at home with their children, but no one said to them, listen, your heart will shatter when you drop this little baby off.
Okay.
And they've got a life with no choice, the opposite of what feminist says it does.
I'll just read a comment, a text message from John in Brisbane. My thoughts on feminism. I object to its somewhat monolithic ideological nature. Many of its objectives are reasonable, but the way it picks up controversial things like abortion and bundles them in with sensible demands like equitable working conditions means it finds itself somewhat sometimes marginalised. Many people would be happy to agree with many of feminism's objectives, but reject the catch-all label for this reason. Just, I'll take some calls and I'll come back to Monica Dux. Perhaps you would like to comment on what Janet's just said about women at work. Danielle in Queensland, good morning to you.
Hi, it's Daniel.
Daniel, sorry.
That's okay.
There you go. Freudian slip. What would you like to say?
My point about feminism is I pretty much agree with nearly what every caller has said. What most feminists are is different political groups. Like most religious groups are, fundamentalists, there are moderates, there are extremists. And I think the problem with feminists, we don't identify the different groups and we just look at it as one group. So when something happens that's bad or negative that we don't agree with, that's all feminists, not that category that believe in pro-abortion, anti-male, pro-male, all across the board. We don't recognise the different factions within the main broad stroke of feminism.
If you did that, what would the impact be if you tried to break down the broad church?
No. With feminism, I think that's something that they have to themselves come to recognise and then deal with that internally. Because until they understand each other, they're just going to be these two warring groups within the same, trying to achieve the same thing of equality, but just all going about it in different ways. And because they don't recognise each other and it's just one group versus the other, they don't have a coherent voice.
Daniel, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Jessica in Victoria, good morning.
Morning.
You're a trained electrician?
That's right, yes. And my grandmother was the first woman to drive from Adelaide to Melbourne.
Oh, there you go. That's a claim to fame, if ever there was one.
Yes.
So what would you like to add? I think it's on your perspective of working in an ostensibly male domain.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And, one of the attractions of working as an electrician is the fact that it's unionised and has good pay. So, of course, there are reasons why people go into these supposedly all-male areas. And, we dealt with it. With the support of the union, we dealt with the discrimination. But I'd just like to say that the line of feminism continues in my family to my daughter, who's also an active young feminist. And her activity encompasses the whole range of supporting women's right to abortion, to a safer spaces policy, which they initiate in all the events that they run, which means that if any women do feel threatened in any way in those spaces, they get support instantly. So they're proactive in the way they deal with it.
But what about the discussion that we had earlier, or that my guests had earlier, about women feeling pressured to go into a male domain?
Not at all. The attraction was the fact that opportunity came to me. I don't feel any pressure, and I also was a stay-at-home mum when my kids were young. So I think that you make the choices to your, and we proved that. The only thing stopping women being electricians wasn't a perception that they weren't capable.
Okay, thanks for the call. Appreciate it, Jess. Eleanor in New South Wales, hello there.
Oh, hi.
What do you want to add about the discussion you're hearing?
Yeah, for sure. So, look, anti-feminism, as I understand it, and these young women who are holding these placards online, both seem to rely on the claim that there's no longer any systemic disadvantage against women. And a lot of the women in the US who are literate and can access the internet, and you mentioned Katy Perry and Lady Gaga, they might quite rightly feel that they aren't oppressed anymore. But what that conversation ignores, I think, is that there are women who are victims of systemic or religious violence, who are denied education, or who don't have their sexual consent taken seriously by the laws around them. And just because the handful of women holding these placards won the lottery of birth and grew up in countries where that doesn't happen, that doesn't mean that the global struggle for women's liberation is over. So they might be right that there's no disadvantage against them. But so far as I'm concerned, I need feminism because I don't just care about me or my life or my experience. I care about women who don't have my skin colour or my education or my disposable income.
Okay, a global point to be made there. I'll come back to my guests on that. Thanks, Eleanor. Jen in Cairns in Queensland, good morning. Now, you want to talk about the fact that people don't often identify as feminism until they've experienced discrimination.
Yeah, feminism is one of those funny things, hashtag I don't need feminism, because, it's wonderful. I applaud those women that are out there doing it because obviously they've lived lives where they've never needed it. Now, I myself identify as a feminist. I didn't always. I had a very conservative Catholic school upbringing, and it wasn't actually until as a teenager I experienced physical and sexual abuse. And when I addressed this issue within my school, suddenly I had the weight of the Catholic Church in terms of my parish priest. I had my male school-based constable. I even had male members in my own family telling me, look, you don't want to make a big deal of this. And I remember at the time thinking, something was gone from me. It was gone forever. Now, I come from a pretty middle-class family. My parents are very loving. I don't have any sort of markers that might identify me as a potential, dirty word feminist. It wasn't until as a teenager I found myself completely alone and isolated, and this sense of being not equal to the society that I was living in, not equal to the males in my society, and it revisited many times in my life. And it wasn't until, you get to a point where you actually realise you need feminism. Feminism doesn't have a manifesto that says we're out to get rid of men, we're out to force anybody. Feminism literally means for women, and at the end of the day, women don't enjoy the same legal standing, financial standing as men in our society.
Jen, thanks very much for the call. Yeah. Really appreciate it. Very strong point made. Just want to read a text message and I'll come back to my guests. Wendy writes, I think both of your guests have valid points of view. I think all three guests she's probably implying. I think women's perspectives are overrepresented in education and underrepresented in politics. Both shape future generations. Gender equality across the board would help. Can you ask both of your guests how we can work towards a better balance in both areas? That is, how do we take the boozy, blokey culture out of politics and the focus on sitting still out of the school experience? Thanks very much, Wendy. Let's come back to our guests. Janet Bloomfield, the point about that in some parts of the world women have a degree of equality that other women in other parts of the world simply don't.
Right, and that's important. In countries and in places in the world where women literally do not have rights, they do need a system to address that and get them to the point where all the adults have equal rights. What's happened in North America is women have more rights than men right now. And in response to that last question, how we get to gender equality is to start addressing the big glaring rights that men don't have and start looking at individuals as people and not as a gender.
You're part of a pro-male movement, but does it have to be contingent on also being part of an anti-feminist movement? Why have you set up this dichotomy, I guess I'm interested to know?
Oh, because it's mostly feminists who fight against men getting the last of their rights. For example, shared parenting. The presumption upon divorce that children are entitled to a relationship with their mother and their father equally. That is opposed vigorously and vehemently by feminists who literally oppose equality when it's men who are the ones who are lacking equality. And there's just no way for feminism to get around that hypocrisy and that anti-male.
Let's come to Alex Gorman. Your thoughts, Alex?
Now, I think that that's not necessarily true. I think a lot of feminists would argue that equal parenting is one of the most important things that we can win, because it frees up the women who don't want to have full responsibility for childcare to go out and pursue the careers that they want, and it frees up the men who don't necessarily want to have big, audacious careers or who don't necessarily want to be the sole breadwinners to go to the home and be in that space where they're happier. And in terms of getting to a point where we're all more equal, I think that that is actually the way that we do it, to say that your gender shouldn't matter when it comes to going into politics or going into education. I think that there's much more stigma around men taking traditionally female roles on, men going into careers like childcare or becoming stay-at-home dads. And there are still these huge boy clubs that it's very difficult for women to penetrate, and we need to break down the barriers of entry for both genders into traditionally male and female roles.
Okay, a text message. Some women have more equal choices than others. The label of feminism would be less of a problem if more men described themselves and acted as feminists. Then the ideals of feminism might be closer to being achieved in society. Back to you, Monica Dux. Your thoughts? I imagine you have a few.
Oh, I have many. But look, I think it comes down once again to this idea that we're arguing. You're right. We're arguing over semantics here. The label. Now, attacking.
Well, no, we're not. Are we necessarily? I mean, I'm not arguing, but more the point. What Janet's making the point about is that we're also arguing about life experiences.
Well, I do think feminism is very generational. I think that earlier caller pointing out that we come to feminism at different points in our life. I think a lot of what Janet is saying is, as has been pointed out in the last hour, issues that are feminist issues. If we're talking about men, we want to get men more inclusive in family life, have them to take on more care roles, all of that. So I think she's raising a lot of those issues. But I think this sense that we're attacking a big bad feminist just isn't very helpful, and I think it's traditionally been a way that feminism has been attacked. We can just say, oh, the feminists are doing all these terrible things, but actually I think the feminists can actually fix a lot of those things and are working towards fixing a lot of those things in many, many different ways.
Chris Smith has tweeted, one question for feminists, where is the International Men's Day? Where are the men's health centres? Monica.
Well, if we want to talk about men's health, let's look at women's health and women's reproductive rights and the way that, men's every day is a man's day. He's earning 17 cents more every day than a woman is. I mean, you don't really need to look very far at the issues that are both domestic and international in terms of women's rights. And I think, let's look at Parliament. It's most often a men's day, I think what Julia Gillard really showed a lot of Australians was the extent to which we still live in a deeply sexist society in so many different ways. And the fight will continue whether we have these discussions about whether the label's worthwhile or not, or whether we need to rebrand feminism.
Let's squeeze a few more calls in as we head to the top of the clock. So much we could go for days. Kate in New South Wales, good morning. I think you have 3 little boys.
Yes, I do. I have 3 little boys, and my middle child is 5 years old and took a bunch of flowers for Valentine's Day to a little girl he thought was pretty in his classroom. And he was accused of sexualising that little girl. And, I think it's seemingly okay for young girls to put posters up of men of young boys that they like and to lust after them, that people are sort of forgetting that little boys, the reason why we have humankind and why we have generation after generation is because little boys find little girls pretty.
So how would you like that to tie into this conversation about feminism and its relevance?
I feel, as a flow-on effect of feminism, that boys have been, discriminated against in schools. Just because my son found a little girl pretty doesn't mean that, she was being sexualised. And the mother of the child was actually a feminist, a self-proclaimed feminist. And I think what happens is people seem to forget that women and men are made very differently. And a man and a woman make a child because they can bring different things to children's lives to ensure a very effective, stable upbringing. And feminism tries to rob men of their right to raise their children with a male role model as well as a female role model.
Kate, thank you very much for the call. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Butros in Canberra, we can just squeeze you in very quickly.
Okay, so there's been a lot of sort of talk about different sort of broad churches and people who are effectively feminists but sort of going against it. But in the same way how I'm unable to identify with a political party anymore because of asylum seeker issues. There are people who might identify with Liberals or Labor or Nationals or these other things, but they're unable to actually follow through on economic or labour issues because of some very core things.
Okay, but bringing it back to the topic of feminism, what point would you like to make there?
So these women who are saying they're against feminism have some core things that they agree with, but they're unable to agree with the label of feminism because of some specific things that it represents.
And?
And that might be like abortion, it could be sort of perceptions, it could be the semantics of these things.
Okay.
And they're unable to identify with feminism. Of course, I agree with it, even though those broad church issues that they might agree on, like equality, egalitarianism, are different.
Yes, you've really illustrated and summed up the discussion that we've had very well, I think. Thanks very much, Buttress. And I want to thank our guests too. Janet Bloomfield from Canada, thank you for joining us. A very final brief comment from you. I've got 10 seconds.
Okay, it comes down to what Katie says. Feminism says it does one thing, but what it actually does is attack a little 5-year-old boy for bringing a little girl flowers. That's feminism. It's toxic. It needs to go.
Monica Dux, briefly, finally to you. 5 seconds.
Look, feminism is so much bigger than reducing it to one person's experience, and I think that's the overriding point here, really.
Alex Gorman.
What Monica said. Thanks so much for having me on, Natasha.
Alex Gorman, Monica Dux, Janet Bloomfield, thank you very much. And look, it's gone off on Twitter at RN Life Matters, our listener feedback line 028333 1430. Couldn't get to all your text messages, but you can get on our Facebook page and our website abc.net.au/RN. Look for Life Matters. Books and Arts Daily, off to the Garma Festival in the Northern Territory. Wonderful. Coming up straight after the news on RN. Have a great weekend. Lindy Rain produced today's talkback. Bye from me.
One of the world's most famous reference books is Grey's Anatomy. There's even a TV show named after it. The creation of the book was itself something of a medical drama. First, Grey tried to kill off the illustrator.
The first edition proofs with Grey's corrections all over them, he basically cut through Carter's name on the title page.
Crossed it out?
Yes.
Then he was accused of plagiarism. The story of Grey's Anatomy in the body sphere. Listen online at the RN website.